I'm Senator Chip Campson. I've called this press conference in order to share with the public and with the press a budget proviso that I will offer later today to the state budget. And it is a proviso that would prohibit local governments and DHEC from issuing permits for onshore infrastructure that would be associated with offshore drilling. It is the only way that we can get a ban on that infrastructure in place this year, and that's why I am offering this budget proviso. We can follow up with a permanent law change next year. We can put the same proviso in the budget next year. But it needs to happen this year because we are on the cusp of seismic testing being approved. The only thing that's held up seismic testing from happening thus far is a vacancy in the Secretary of Interior's office. Last week, David Bairdhart was confirmed as the Secretary of Interior. And so it can come at any moment, the authorization for the seismic testing. Seismic testing may take as little as 108 days. One of the 5 companies who are going to do seismic testing, one of them has indicated it will only take them 108 days to do it, which means they could move immediately into the permitting phase and the planning phase of any infrastructure necessary to exploit offshore oil. I am very pleased to have Governor McMaster, Attorney General Wilson with me, legislative leaders. Governor McMaster, Attorney General Wilson are going to make some comments as well as Minority Leader in the Senate, Senator Setzler, and also Tim Goodwin, who's the mayor of Folly Beach and the chairman of the Beach Advocates Association, which is the beachfront communities in this state who are unanimously opposed to offshore drilling. So, Governor, I'd like to turn it over to you, please.
Thanks, Senator. I apologize for my voice. Senator Campson is right. This needs to be done immediately, and this is a constitutional way in which the state can express and enforce its own sovereignty over this very important matter. Y'all may remember I had 2 conversations, one face-to-face and one over the phone with Mr. Zinke, the leaving Secretary of the Interior, and he listened very well, but we made no progress. So this is exactly what we need to do. Briefly, I've got a little list of all the reasons why testing and drilling is a bad idea. One is tourism. One of our major industries is tourism. This would have the effect or the potential of ruining that, and that includes vacations as well as people just coming to the coast. Also commercial fishing, sports fishing, people recreational fishing, all those sorts of uses we make of the water and the creeks and the marshes. Also homes. South Carolina has a soft coast. In Texas, Louisiana, they have a hard coast where these things have been there for years and are part of the environment there, sometimes to their detriment. But our coast is soft. We don't have this kind of industry on our coast, and we don't want one. We are headed in a completely different direction, and that's one reason that we have these business and industries coming from all over the world to settle in South Carolina, is because they like the beaches, they like the ocean, they like the marshes, they like the mountains, they like all of what we have in nature. Also, physically, there's no room for the sort of inland infrastructure that'd be necessary. You've seen pictures of it. There's one right there. We have no place to put that kind of infrastructure, nor do we want the trucks and the vehicles going in and out 24 hours a day and all that would entail. And also, we are right, South Carolina is in Hurricane Alley. And can you imagine the results of a spill topped by a hurricane? We'd have oil all the way up to Caesar's Head or maybe to Charlotte. You remember when Hurricane Hugo came through. And finally, the last thing was we recently discovered there's old disposed ordnance, that is bombs, from World War II out there somewhere. In fact, we have it in the Congaree River as well. That's cause for caution. It may be able to be isolated, but again, it's one more reason on top of a whole lot of other good ones why this is not the place for that, and the reason why we must do all we can to protect our coast. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. And I'd like to point out that to my right here are pictures of Deer Park, Texas, a wildlife refuge in Louisiana, and Port Arthur, Texas. These are, and to my left, of some beautiful pictures of our South Carolina coastline. And the question is simple. Do we want this on South Carolina's coast, or do we want what we currently have protected on South Carolina's coast? I first became an opponent of offshore drilling when it was first floated because I'm in the maritime industry. I've spent time in the Gulf of Mexico. I've seen firsthand the onshore infrastructure necessary to support offshore drilling. It is massive, it is industrial, it is dirty. It looks like this, and it's hundreds of square miles of that type of infrastructure. And I've also spent a lifetime exploring the coast of South Carolina, hunting, fishing, surfing. I know the coast of South Carolina, most of it like the back of my hand. And I can tell you there is no place for this type of infrastructure, and there is no tolerance for, there's an oil spill filling an estuary in Louisiana, a wildlife refuge. No tolerance for that in South Carolina. That's why we need this ban. I'm going to turn it over to Attorney General Wilson. General.
Thank you, Senator Campson. I appreciate you for allowing me to be with this wonderful group of people standing up here with me today. If you look behind me, this is very much a bipartisan press conference, but I believe this is a nonpartisan issue. When I first came out in my opposition to what they're attempting to do off the coast, I approached it both from ecological and environmental standpoint, but also approached it from a rule of law. When I talk to people who are for offshore exploration and offshore drilling, and I used to be one of those people, but I believe that the way that they are attempting to do this is incompatible with the rule of law. The way I explain it to people is this. Let's pretend for a moment that we are all the landowners of a big piece of farm property. Our next door neighbor, who happens to be the federal government on the other side of the fence, owns an adjacent piece of property. That's the land under the Atlantic Ocean. Your next door neighbor comes to you and says that they want to drill and blast and develop their property, and that by doing this, they will increase the value of our property. And that's what they're basically telling us. And you'd be like, that's wonderful. I would love to increase the value of my property and derive some income from that. But then upon second look, you learn that your next door neighbor has not complied with all the laws, all the requisite processes for ensuring that there's no environmental harm to your property, that all the Administrative Procedures Acts procedures are followed, and you learn that all of these laws are not followed, and then there's a chance, like they said, that you might derive a great benefit, but there's an equally great chance that you might endure a cataclysmic and catastrophic harm to your property, which in this case is our entire coastline and our infrastructure. Last that I read, I believe our offshore commercial and residential fishing industry is somewhere in the $600 million range. And when you look at, I've seen somewhere between $14 billion and up for our tourism here in South Carolina. And like the governor said, sometime in our history, probably over the last 75 years, we determined that our state was going to be a tourism state. It was going to be a state that is going to have protected wildlife refuges. Other states, which have much longer coastlines, have the ability to have a hardened coastline. They made a very different decision 75, 80, 90 years ago. Well, South Carolina's chosen a different course. And so my job as the Attorney General is to obviously seek opportunities for economic development for our state, which I always support, but you have to balance those against the harm that your state could incur because the other guy, the neighbor, didn't do their job and follow the law. This is also about the rule of law as much as it is about protecting our environment. And so I'm honored to stand up here with Senator Campson, Governor McMaster, and all these wonderful legislators and mayors to speak with one voice that South Carolina is going to protect our property and our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General.
Thank you.
I predict that we will have over 30 sponsors for this proviso in the South Carolina Senate. 24 is a majority in the South Carolina Senate. We will have over 30 sponsors. And one reason is because they see, as the Attorney General indicated, we have a lot at risk. We have a $23 billion tourism industry. 2/3 of it occurs along the coast. That's $15+ billion on the coast alone. That's just one industry. What about real estate? What's the value of the real estate on Kiowa Island, Seabrook, Devido, North Myrtle Beach, the Isle of Palms, Sullivan's Island, Edisto Beach. You're putting Hilton Head, you're putting that at risk. You're also putting at risk fisheries and recreational activities. For what? The predictions are when oil ramps up, it will only produce $3.5 billion of revenue once it ramps up. Why would we jeopardize a $23 billion industry that exists today, plus the value of the real estate along the coast, for $3.5 billion to come in the future? It makes no sense at all. I'm going to ask, this is a bipartisan effort, and so I've asked Senate Minority Leader Nikki Setzler, Senator Nikki Setzler, to say a few words. Senator Setzler.
Thank you, Senator Campson. Thank you, Governor, and Attorney General, and to the members of the Senate who are here and our caucus who are here. You've heard we are working together in a bipartisan manner to protect our pristine coastlines of South Carolina, to protect our tourism industry, and to protect the quality of life of all South Carolinians. None of those are partisan issues. Those are bipartisan issues, and we stand together to prevent offshore drilling, infrastructure, or seismic testing in South Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, lastly, I would like Mayor Tim Goodwin from Folly Beach. Mayor Goodwin is the chair of the Beach Advocates Association of Coastal Communities along South Carolina, and he has been a vocal opponent of offshore drilling for obvious reasons. He lives in paradise, and it threatens paradise. Mayor Goodwin.
Thank you, Senator Campson. I'd just like to say thank you to Senator Campson, Governor McMaster, and all the senators in South Carolina as this bipartisan effort goes forward. As the mayor of Folly Beach and as the chairman of the South Carolina Beach Advocates Association, it's a great thing when we all come together to save our beaches and save our coast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, at this time, I'll field any questions from the press.
Chip, explain the budget proviso tactic. How is that better than a bill like that?
Well, a bill would be better, but there really is no way to get a bill passed this year because of the procedural impediments that exist. You're familiar with them. You're an observer of the State House, the filibuster rules, the special order, having to place something on special order if it's objected to, crossover date, the House bill missed the crossover date. The only way to get this in place that circumvents those procedural impediments is through a budget proviso. And a budget proviso, it has the benefit for those who question whether we ought to do this. They can vote to repeal it next year and not put it in next year's budget if need be. Now, I won't be casting a vote like that, but we're moving the ball forward, and we also are dealing with the real potential of seismic testing being authorized any day now. And only 108 days of seismic testing, and one of the companies is ready to move to development of the actual exploitation of oil, which requires, as everyone knows, first of all, it requires permitting, and that's why this proviso is addressing the permitting at the state and local level and does not permit the issuance of a permit for onshore infrastructure, this kind of stuff that you see in the Gulf, and it's massive. I encourage people to go look at Google Earth. Go look at Deer Park, Texas, and Beaumont, Texas. Port Fourchon, Louisiana. Port Fourchon, Louisiana is the size of Kiowa Island, Folly Beach, and Sullivan's Island combined. It's one of the smaller areas where this kind of infrastructure is located. Go look at it on Google Earth, and then you tell me where it fits in with South Carolina's coastline. I know South Carolina's coast like the back of my hand. I spent my whole life exploring it, and I've spent my legislative career protecting it. This is the greatest threat that our coastline has ever encountered, and we need to put a stop to it.
Could this in any way hold up the budget, though? How do you see this playing into the big picture?
Well, I believe I will have over 30 co-sponsors of this in the Senate, bipartisan support. And I think there's a good chance that the House has a majority support for it as well. And if you do the math, if you just care about economics, you don't care about this. I care about both. I care about this, the Ace Basin, Kiowa, Seabrook Island, DeVos Bank. If you don't care about that, all you care about is economic, it makes no economic sense. To put at risk $23 billion of tourism revenue, the entire coastal real estate market, when you get an oil spill like this, fisheries, recreational fisheries, commercial fisheries, makes no sense to do that for $3.5 billion of revenue. Just makes no sense at all. Any other questions? Thank you all for attending, and thank everyone for participating.
Good job, Senator. Thank you.